I apologize in advance. You hit a certain age in life. I don't know what it is, but it seems to be about 41, 42, and technology seems to get the better of you. And I don't know why or when that happened, but apologies if I pushed the wrong button. I just seem to have turned into that old man who can't work the TV remote. So yes, I'm Grant Erskine, director, founder of Grant Erskine Architects. We've been going now for, well, since what, mid-2010. Just to set this up to give you a little bit of where we are, where we came from, I always like to sort of tell people I was lucky enough to get a job very early on. I left mid A-levels to go get a job in an architect's office. Somebody said you need to get an education. I was accepted to one of the best schools of architecture in the world, which is Manchester. I became an architect over 7 years. It's very, very hard to become an architect over 7 years. The average is about 9.5. You've got to work very hard. Whilst doing that, I was also working in a company called Building Design Partnership, BDP, one of the best companies. And 2007, 2008, 2009 hit the recession, and I was made redundant. I've been lucky enough to dodge 3 waves of redundancies, and it was just an absolute battlefield. They were making people redundant by the dozen, and I got caught in the 4th. So it's funny, I qualified as an architect and launched my own practice in the same couple of weeks. You could say I was made redundant. Well, I always joke about it. Qualified, made redundant, and launched my own practice all in the same week, give or take. So this was 2010. There wasn't very much work around. I took on anything and everything that I could get my hands on. This is sort of back in the days when I was still in the back bedroom of the house, just trying to chip away and make a living. And back in sort of the early days, did a lot of sort of low-end student accommodation. The story I always tell is that a guy rang me one day out of the blue and said, "You've been recommended to me to do an HMO." And I said, "Oh, great." He says, "Can you do an HMO?" And I said, "Yeah, come see me tomorrow." The first thing I did was Google, what is an HMO? This would have been about 2012, 2013. Because I didn't know the phrase. Now, we've been doing student, at this point, have been doing student accommodation. I just didn't know the phrase HMO. And went down, and this guy, multi-millionaire, retired at 27 from an IT background, had done property for sort of 10 years, but it had all been multi-million-pound houses, wanted to get into HMOs. And the first sort of HMO that I did was sort of, in a way, set a new benchmark in Salford. Was a very high-end, very luxury HMO, sort of kitchenettes, en suites, raised decks, very high camera between the rooms and the front door, and all the sort of the uber luxury. And me being me, I brought every potential client and every inquiry I had through that job during the construction phase to show them the next level of HMOs. And within very, very quick matter of months, we very quickly became the go-to practice for HMOs. And that's sort of stayed the same ever since. One of the things that I do say is that we don't brand ourselves as an HMO architect. A lot of people do, but we don't. We brand ourselves as an investor's architect. So we've been there through all the phases. Back when it was HMOs, student HMO, then luxury HMO, and then serviced accommodation started popping up. We started doing a lot of SA stuff. And then sort of assisted living that became very, very popular. Then apartments have become very popular again of late. The serviced accommodation is absolutely going crazy at the minute. Some of the schemes we're doing in that market is just crazy. But fashions change, trends change. The next hot thing comes along. And we've always been there. So we brand ourselves as being the investor's client. So yeah, I think that's a brief overview of what we are, where we've been, what we've done. Just a quick word of warning. And I wrote this about 3-4 months ago, this little panel on the right. And there is a bit of a hint that it's easing up a little bit, but just be aware if you are stacking deals, if you are considering them and you are using numbers from a year ago, your numbers will be out quite a bit. And I would stress a more generous budget, shall we say. We're just seeing it, most prices have gone up 20 to 30% and across the board. Oh, and we are contract admins. We're actively tendering jobs all the time. We project manage quite a lot of builds, so we're actively taking in live prices. Contractor lead times do seem to have gone down a bit in some markets. We are getting contractors telling us they can start in 6 weeks. For a long time, it was sort of 9 to 12 months in some cases. But there are still specialist subcontractor, and it's not even specialist, it's just normal subcontractors. So even though the main contractor might be hot for the job, they're struggling to find, for example, painter decorator seems to be quite short supply at the minute. So we're having main contractors saying to us, look, we're ready to finish out, but we can't get a painter decorator. So just be aware that that's having a bit of an effect, and it still is. And I have a feeling it's going to continue having an ongoing effect throughout most of this year. So just to give you a little taste of the sort of bread and butter project, shall we say? And this is a sort of a standard sort of double bay fronted house in Liverpool. It was done pre-Article 4, was just finished about 2 months ago. But you can sort of see from the standard fare, sort of 4 reception rooms and a kitchen downstairs, 4 bedrooms upstairs with a little sort of 2 bathrooms off the back. Nice big house. Client wanted the usual, shall we say, the best value HMO we could get out of it. So this was the proposal that we took into planning, and we were successful in getting planning for it, which is I believe it was a 12 bed. I can't see past my own screen. Oh, get back there. It is a 11 bed HMO. I always say that it's rare that you'll get 3 bedrooms in the loft, but we were able to get it in this one because just the height of the ridge line, the pitch, that we were able to squeeze 3 bedrooms in. It's very rare. Often you'll get 2, but we were able to get 3. Interestingly, in this one, it was an experience at the time when we were tendering this out maybe 6 to 9 months into sort of the full grip of COVID. And through discussion with the client, we'd sort of start to see a lot of people working from home long-term, permanently. With discussion with the client to try and set himself apart in this market, he actually decided to, bedroom 4, to lose it and turn it into a work from home space. This bottom right-hand photo here, this was supposed to be a bedroom. Not out, so it's a large sort of work from home space, work hub, whichever you want to say, to attract better tenants in. So if you look at the finish, very, very exposed brick, natural materials, leathers, timbers, nice palette of colors. The stuff that we're doing, this picture down the bottom, that's
Grant, we're losing you a little bit. Your Wi-Fi connection is not terribly stable. I don't know whether it might make a difference to turn off your camera so that we can hear you and see your slides, but maybe just reduce some of the bandwidth on the camera. It's you're a bit like a Dalek from time to time.
Apologies. Unfortunately, quite stormy here. We've already had a couple of times, so I've also knocked my phone off. So
yes, if somebody's gaming, that's going to be a
yeah. There's nothing else on.
Okay, fine.
It's to say the wind's blowing and the power has cut out. So apologies.
That's all right. So, that sounds a little bit better now, actually. But I'll let you know if we have difficulties. But no, that sounds better now. Thank you.
Into the main theme, shall we say? The recent amendments to the PD rules. So, as I'm sure most of you will know, permitted development rules changed in July, August last year. 1st of August is when they came into effect. And the main theme behind them was that it was supposed to open up more development opportunities. And what we actually found that the very real effect of this is that it isn't true. It's actually closed off a lot of opportunities. But I'll quickly surmise the highlight points. All habitable rooms need to have natural light. This is not a new thing. This has been around for about 18 months, but it has been reinforced. And we are finding it we had one scheme that was refused. There was a PD scheme that was refused because the planning officer didn't agree that there was sufficient natural light in the basement. The thing that sort of annoyed us is that we actually went to the length of doing the daylight factoring to show that there was sufficient natural light based on standard design guidance, but he still refused it. And unfortunately, the way it was structured with the client decided not to pursue it through appeal because he was on the subject of planning and what have you. So it is one of those things that actually can have a bit of a big impact. It's also going to have a big impact when I tell you something else in a minute. But so natural light's important. The NDSS, the Nationally Described Space Standards, are now applied to all prior approval schemes. So you pretty much need to, if you're putting in a prior approval scheme, have it at a minimum of 37 square meters. I don't think that's really that important personally, because all flats that we've ever done, all apartments we've ever done have always been over 30 square meters because most investors want as wide a portfolio of lenders as they can get. But I suppose there has been some developers that have been doing teeny tiny apartments. The other implication of this is that we're finding is that now that this has been enshrined in the permitted development rules, we're finding that most councils are using it as a benchmark for even full planning applications. So we've submitted quite a few schemes in different councils where maybe one of the flats has been a little bit under the 37, and we're getting it thrown back at us and said, no, it needs to be over. Even though the national space standard hasn't been adopted in their policies, they're still saying, we want you to do this because it's now a minimum development route. So we're now saying it has to be a minimum in the full planning route. So we do get quite a lot of inquiries from people saying, I want to do micro studios. It's a really tough sell. One thing I always say about planning is all you ever do is mitigate risk. There's no black and white in this game. A lot of it is trying to just reduce the risks, and trying to put in a scheme of sub 37 square meter units is very risky. That's the best way to put it. The property must be empty for 3 months prior to submission of the application. Now that's an interesting one. It's affected quite a lot of projects because a lot of investors use the same strategy where they will go to a building owner, whether that's a building owner run by the company in place or whether that's a landlord who has tenants. And it's not uncommon for us to be measuring up a property out of hours because the building owner doesn't want the tenants knowing that they're going to do an application for change of use, or doesn't want the staff knowing. Now that the building has to be empty for 3 months, the old strategy of you'd approach the building owner and say, well, look, I want an option agreement on it. I'll submit the application. If we get the approval through, then I'll buy the building from you. Isn't really an option anymore. Now what you've got to do is you've got to buy the building, or at the very least tell the landlord to kick the tenants out and let the building lie empty for 3 months before you apply. So the old days of the submitting the application and then removing the tenants are gone. And the logic behind it is that the government are trying to protect workspaces. But it's surprising how many schemes that we would have had prior to this are no longer available. So it's, certainly not creating more development opportunities, that one. It probably must be used as C3 for its entire life. It cannot be used as C4. So it was quite a common strategy that we would do would be to submit let's say, a commercial unit into 4 apartments. But I think I'll show you, I think the next thing I'll show you is one of these schemes where we would submit it for, say, 4 apartments, all with 4 bedrooms in them, and then run them as 4 4-bed mini-mos. You can't do that anymore. So if you want to try and use PD to get to an HMO, what you're going to have to do is going to go commercial to resi, build out a big flat, let's say build out a big 6-bedroom flat, and then apply for the HMO license. It's super high risk because of the planner's turnaround, or not the HMO license, sorry, the HMO planning approval, full planning. Super high risk because if the planners turn around and say, no, we approve that, then you're in the scenario where you've built out a 6-bed flat that you can only rent to a family. So that sort of risk. PD route to go from commercial to HMO anymore. There's a lot more interest in acoustic treatment, where nobody quite knows how this is going to filter through. We've got about 4 or 5 commercial to resi applications in at the minute, and we're trying to ascertain what the impact of this is. So it's looking like it's going to be on a council by council basis. And from talking to a few acoustic consultants, they say that in London, there's a lot more interest than there was traditionally in anywhere else. And they would say that some boroughs would be very hot on getting the full acoustic report and design done to support the application. Other boroughs don't care. I think that's going to be the case everywhere else. So we've got an application in Liverpool for 2 flats above a shop. And it's the same form, it's the same question in the form. They said, and they're asking about risks with regards to acoustics. In essence, I've written a statement on the application form because it's the most cost-effective way to do it. But we have another scheme that we're submitting in Stockport, and Stockport are notoriously tough on all of, if they can ask you for it, they're going to ask you for it. But it's notoriously tough on this type of thing. So the client has agreed to get a full acoustic report and design done. What this means for you is that if that becomes the norm, every single PD scheme is going to have a £1,500 bill, shall we say, at the front end before you've even got approval. We tried to do it with one, it was actually with Stockport, where we'd say, well, can we do this by condition where we'll submit it afterwards? And they wouldn't accept it. So just to let that sink into it, it really goes in, shall we say. Little simple commercial uppers into resi, 2 flats. The planning fee is a couple of £100, you get the drawings done. Well, we'll not talk fees on drawings, but you could very well need to get a full acoustic survey and acoustic report done. That's another £1,500 up on the front end before you've even submitted it. So just be aware of that. And we're as I say we, I mean the whole industry is waiting to see how this is going to pan out. Is this going to be, it's done on a case-by-case basis? Is this going to be that's done on a council-by-council basis? And none of us are quite sure yet. So we've a few apps that have gone in with the acoustic report. We have a few apps where I'm ultimately chancing my arm because it's a small job or because I can make a good argument. But I've tried before just writing a statement, this will comply with all approved documents at building reg stage. And they've just went, no, we're not accepting that statement. Next one, under the old PD rules, you could make minor elevational changes on some of the routes being removed. So they've now ring-fenced all of the commercial units, well, all the commercial units we're talking about into Class A. And under the new PD rules, there doesn't appear to be any facility to make elevational changes. That's a massive drawback. Because if, say, for example, to open up the space internally, you needed to put in a couple of windows, you used to be able to do that under the old PD rules. You can't now. So when you take into account that habitable rooms need to have adequate natural light, but you can't actually do elevational changes, you're now in a scenario where you've got to do a full planning application, which I'll show you, we've got an example of it, I'll show you in a minute. A full planning application for elevational changes first, then another application for prior approval to change the use class. So it's 2 planning apps to get from A to B to C. You might be asking, well, why don't you just do a full planning application for elevational changes and for the use class change on one hit? And it's to do with what they're going to ask for. So if I have a small office that has only, say, a couple of windows on one end and we want to stick some windows in the other end, I stick in an application to put in extra windows. They're not going to ask me to consider parking spaces or bin storage or cycle storage or any of those other things that they can do on a full planning application for residential use class. And then when we have the windows, we submit the prior approval application and they can't demand parking. Parking is not one of the requirements of a PD prior approval. So that's the reason that you would take that strategy. That in essence, if you have limited outdoor space, you do the prior approval, but you've still got to do the full planning first. If that's not clear, ask me, I'll go over it again at the end, but that's why we take that strategy. Another limitation, this is a real pain in the ass, this one. At present, you cannot make a prior approval application via the planning portal. Any rush to do this. So up until, when was it? August, we could sit at the computer, upload all the drawings, hit submit, put in the client's email. The email goes to the client with the payment details, a reference and the payment details. The client puts in their bank details, payment goes across. Assuming he uses backs, it's there in 4 hours. The time starts ticking there at that point. Now, the only way you can submit it is by emailing the planning department. We've submitted one to Stockport middle of last week. It still hasn't been paid for because nobody can get in touch with the council. Client's trying, I'm trying, nobody will get in touch. They haven't got in touch with us, so we can't make the payment, so the clock hasn't started. So that's an annoyance with that you can't, that because you've got to do it that way, you are relying heavily on the responsiveness of the council. And well, we all know how responsive planning departments are. Major benefit behind it, and this is the way it was pitched out at the beginning, was it now includes a lot more commercial units that it didn't include the first time round. So prior to, there was commercial units that weren't included. They're now included in it, so it opens up the potential for more buildings to be developed. It's also square meter each that you can develop. It used to be 150 square meters. It's now went up to 1,500 square meters. So you can do a lot bigger schemes under PD. So they're the two major benefits. It's interesting, just as a little case study. I haven't got here, but I'll talk about it. We rushed to submit an application before the rules changed for a office to, I think it was 6 or 7 flats. I can't remember for sure, in Trafford, and the planning officer accepted it. It all went along fine. There's a few bits and pieces back and forth, but it was all going along fine. The last minute, the planning officer turned around and went, we can't accept this. We can't approve it. This prior approval, PD prior approval, we can't approve it because it's a recruitment office. And me being a clever dick, I said, but it's not a recruitment office. It is owned by a recruitment company, but it is their head office. And their head office does not actually do day-to-day recruitment services. It's their in-house HR, it's their in-house contracts team, their in-house accounts team. So we would say that the use class is more akin to B1 office space. And went, okay, great. Then the clever planning officer went back in time on Google Street View and found the previous company that had owned it back in, I think the date's 2010, August 2010, I think is the date. And it was a recruitment company at that point. So they threw out the planning up the prior approval application because it had been a recruitment office 10 years ago. I was like, give me a break with you. You're being really, really tough on us. So we've withdrawn the application and we've resubmitted it because under the new rules, the recruitment company can have the prior approval. So just as an example of a scheme that we used to do that we no longer can do, this is an office scheme in East Manchester. The application was to turn it into 4 C3 apartments, 4-bed apartments. And then once built out, it can be used as 4-bed HMOs. Really simple. You don't have to tell the council anything, you just go ahead and you do it. Under the new rules, you can't do this anymore. If you apply for that scheme, at best you can have 2 unrelated people living in each flat. And if you do want to run them as HMO, you would need to go back for full planning to convert them to HMO. So on to the next one. This is a table that I've just created today to try and help people get their head around some things.
I think this is really useful actually, Grant, because I think that, some of us are going to be sitting there going, oh, this is a nightmare, because we've counted so much on C3 to C4 permitted development. We've kind of based our whole business around that. And there'll be people tonight be thinking, I'm really looking forward to be able to do C3 to C4, for example, taking a commercial building, turning it into C3 and then PDing it to C4. And effectively what you're saying is, no, you can't do that anymore. There's a further planning step required if you want to achieve that. Right. And it is, more bureaucracy, more hoops you have to jump through. And, it's going to be interesting to see the impact actually on the industry. But This is excellent. I love tables like this because somebody like me who finds this very complicated can just go, right, what have I got? What do I want to get? Where do I need to get? You know, what's the pathway through it all? So I think this is really helpful. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say this looks great.
It's interesting what you've said. I don't think I will ever see somebody go from commercial to resi, and then from resi with a full planning application to HMO, because it's a massive risk factor in as far as you're going to have to take that commercial space and then you're going to have to turn it into a, let's say, a 5-bed flat, gambling everything on the chance that they will say yes at the full planning stage. So I don't think it'll ever happen, because ultimately, a lot of, as I said earlier on, a lot of what we do is risk mitigation, and a lot of what clients do, probably investor clients do, is they take educated risks, you know, and that sounds like a big educated risk. So this table, I'm trying to show what sort of level. I've added a few things on which I'll explain, because this is a couple of factors here are really important. Down the left-hand side is the number of occupants living in your property. And this seems to be something that people don't understand or don't seem to get their head around. It's not the number of bedrooms, it's the number of occupants. So if you have 6 bedrooms with 6 single people living in them, that is a 6-bedroom HMO. It is also a 6-person HMO. If you have 3 couples living together, theoretically, 6-person HMO. So if you have dual occupancy rooms, i.e. 3 couples living together. Now there is a question on when does a couple become one household, but we'll not go into the semantics of it. Let's just say 3 couples, casual couples, living together, 2 to a room. You have a 6-person HMO, or a 6-bed. It's not a 6-bed, it's a 6-person, and that requires a license. So what I've done down the left-hand side is sort of listed the variants of occupations. So you have 2 people living together, doesn't have any questions around it. 3 people or more living together of the same family, the same household, doesn't have any questions about it. They're both deemed clear-cut C3, no questions. 3 unrelated people becomes C4, 4, 5, and 6, all C4. Once you go into 7 people, now remember, this is not 7 bedrooms, this is 7 people, you're into sui gen. So if you have a 6-bed HMO and one of your tenants moves in their lover, and they're there for, one of the definitions of an HMO is it is your primary residence. Okay, that's the it's the primary residence of the occupant. So if somebody's staying the odd weekend, it's not going to cause a huge. I know landlords like to use this as leverage to their tenants to say, look, you're in breach of planning, but at the end of the day, they're not really. But if they do move their boyfriend in for a couple of months, then yeah, actually, you are. You've taken your 6-bed HMO and turned it into a 7-person HMO and it becomes sui gen. It requires a planning application. So whether or not planning is required, if you're going from a house to an HMO, first 2 rows, again, no, they don't apply, no application. For 3 through 6 people, you can do, it's a very simple hop from a C3 to a C4 HMO with no planning, unless it's in an Article 4 area. And then if you're going to more than 6 people, and again, remember, not 6 bedrooms, 6 people, you need the planning application. For commercial to resi, if you want to go from commercial to resi, do you require planning? Not if it's going to be lived in by 2 people, and not if it's going to be lived in by 3 people if they are all related. But pretty much anything else, you will need planning. So 3-bed, 4-bed, 5-bed, 6-bed HMO, 7-bed HMO, you're going to need planning. HMO license required. So for 2 and 3 related people, no, doesn't apply anyway. For 3 and 4, no, unless it's a special licensed area or a selective licensed area. Once you get into 5 people, again, remember, it's not bedrooms, it's 5 people, you need a license. So this is something to always bear in mind as well when you're trying to keep yourself legal, is that if you've got a 4-bed house and somebody moves a boyfriend in, you don't need planning, but it does affect your license. And you do need a license for 5 and greater. thermal upgrade, and this is one we've been battling about over the last year, and we think we've finally come to a point where we all understand this. If you are doing, let's leave the top row out, doesn't matter. If you're doing a house to HMO, 3-bed, you don't need to thermally upgrade the walls, or a 4 or a 5 or a 6, because in the eyes of building control, it's not deemed to be a use class change. If you go to a 7 and above, a house to a 7 and above, you need to thermally line that building under building regs requirements. So if you're doing a large 8-bed HMO, and here's the thing, this is only something that seems to have come into effect. It's been around for a while, but nobody really pushed it. But in the last year, it seems to be getting pushed a lot more. If you're taking and just to be really clear on this, I ran 2 schemes side by side in that 10-bed that I showed you in Liverpool. We ran that, finished in October, November last year, and we had a 7-bed in Bury. Same building control company, didn't ask for the thermal lining of the 10-bed in Liverpool, did ask for the thermal lining for the 7-bed in Bury. So, and I wasn't obviously going to raise this. Well, I raised it after they'd given them the certificate for the 10-bed, and they're like, oh yeah, we made a mistake. We didn't think to ask you. So a lot of the time, building control are making this shit up as they go along. Approved inspectors, or I should say, making it up as they go along. But just bear this in mind, that if you are doing a 7-bed, a house to 7 person, or a house to 7-bed HMO, you will need to thermally line that building, and your costs will go up to do so. I would generally recommend thermally lining a building anyway, because you're paying for the bills. But if you're very, very tight on space standard, and all of a sudden you're having to shave off an extra 3 inch on the perimeter of a couple of walls, that could hurt. And we've not with us, we have heard of a few clients that it's been bang on 10 square meters, but then they've thermally lined it and it's down to 9.6 square meters, and it's no longer achieving a license for the HMO. And then thermal upgrade from commercial to resi in every case. Just like that, you will need, I say thermal upgrade. It's not actually a thermal upgrade. It's ensuring that the fabric of the building meets a certain thermal standard. We're just finding in pretty much every single case that means an upgrade. But it just says, it's just showing that it meets a thermal, an insulative quality. So just the notes to remember, yeah, in an Article 4 area, you'll need planning for anything to go from a single dwelling to HMO. The way to think of Article 4, it is the removal of permitted development to go to a house of multiple occupancy. A lot of people are scared of Article 4s. We have quite a lot of success in Article 4 in some councils. So we've got 100% hit rate in Salford, and we have a 100% hit rate in Trafford. Don't have 100% in Liverpool, and they're very oppositional. And yeah, Manchester's a no-go. Man, I had a guy, a planning officer, screaming down the phone at me one day, "This is Manchester, we don't do HMOs." We had submitted an application to, it was convert a 8-bed HMO into a 10-bed HMO. And the application would have been in a matter of days, and the planning officer rang me in a very grumpy way, said, I'm going to refuse your application. And I said, why? So it's Article 4. Went, yeah, but it's an existing 8-bed to a 10-bed. Article 4's purpose is only there to protect a family home. It's not there to stop the development of existing HMOs. And he just screamed down the phone at me, "This is Manchester, we don't do HMOs." If you've ever seen the movie 300, it felt like I should have been kicked into a hole backwards, because that's, you know, proper, this is Sparta screaming. Yeah, and then just remember that licensing, general rule of thumb, is 5 or more, but some councils do want licensing for all HMOs. So we can come back to this. What's required for a planning application? You'll note that I've titled this, "What's required for a planning application stroke prior approval." The days of the prior approval are long gone, to the point where I charge the exact same for a full planning application as I do a prior approval application, because the amount of work is exactly the same. So you will definitely be required to do for both schemes. And even, this is the thing that really frustrates me, even if there are no elevational changes, we are getting asked for elevational drawings, existing and proposed. Even though I have said to them, there's no elevational changes. You shouldn't be asking for this. The problem that we're having is that before the job is even getting to a planning officer, it's going through like a pre-planning officer validation check, who is admin, who can't put a tick in a box, so they're not proceeding with it. So it's not getting pushed forward. So we're just finding, you know what, just get it all done. Because at the end of the day, time's the important thing. So the very bare minimum, location plan, existing site layout, proposed site layout. Proposed site layout, you want to show things like your bin store and bike store. It's important. A lot of people just think the site layout is just a blown up version of the location plan, a 1 to 500, but actually it's an opportunity for you to sort of show additional stuff. Existing floor plans, proposed floor plans, existing elevations, proposed elevations. So say bin storage details, cycle storage details, finishing details. You can put them on the planning application form itself. We do like to put them in the drawing as well. Because answers in the past come to us and say, can you put the finishes schedule on the drawing? And we'll say, well, it's on the application form. And they'll say, oh, but I like to see it on the drawing. And you're in the scenario here where you go, well, do I fight with you about it, or do I just put them on the drawing? And at the end of the day, we always take the path of least resistance. I'm not looking to make enemies, so I just do it. Or should I say, I'm not looking to piss the planning officer off. I want them to be kind to us, so I do it. Finishing details, the completed application form, and the bare minimum stuff. The possibly required stuff. The design and access statement. It's not required for everything. We generally suggest doing it because it's a good way to explain some of the points of the reasons of why stuff has been done. The acoustic report is becoming more and more prevalent. It just seems to be, it's getting asked for practically everything. Flood risk assessment. It's a little tip for you. A lot of investors don't think to check if the property is in a flood risk area when they are buying it. Really easy to do. There's a website you go on to, you type in the postcode, and it will tell you if it's in an FR1 or an FR2 or not. And it's a risk that can be mitigated. It's not the end of the world if it's in a flood risk area. It's just an extra cost that you're going to have to pay. Also, if you're going to try and develop the basement in a flood risk area, it'll be a bit less welcome, shall we say. So that's something that I would check when you're doing your own due diligence, when you're looking at a new property, is it in a flood risk area. Heritage statement, transport statement, environmental impact assessment, ecological survey, tree survey. Ecological survey is like a bat survey. If you're buying an empty property, chances are you'll be asked to get a bat survey done. If you're buying a property that's near big trees, you might well be asked to get a bat survey done. Timescales for planning ups. So prior approval is, we say it's 56 plus 1 days from receipt of payment. This will take you back to the point I was making earlier on of under the new way you've got to submit the prior approvals. It's the clock only starts when the payment is received. If you can't make the payment, the clock hasn't started. So even though I've submitted that one in Stockport a week ago, the clock still hasn't started because the client hasn't been able to pay. Full planning really depends on local authority. We're saying 3 to 9 months is a reasonable estimation. And you know what, it can go for 18 months. So there are stories all over social media of people and how long they've been waiting. We've lost quite a few projects because of just planning delays. And then I don't know if any of you are dealing with Tameside. Tameside just don't respond to you. They just don't respond. They actually give you a standard bounce back email where it says, we will not be responding. This scheme here on the right-hand side is a planning app that we put in before Christmas for the little building on the right is 3 new apartments. So the building on the left, on that top image, was an existing pub that we've converted into 3 flats. Then the building on the right was the old beer garden that we stuck in an application for a new build, 3 new build little flats on it. That went in early November, and it was approved by early January, about 8.5 weeks. I have no idea why. If I did know, I'd make sure I did it every time. In the same council, we have submitted an application for conversion of a large dwelling into, I think it's 6 apartments. That has been in for nearly a year, and they have been ignoring us for about 8 months, just ignoring us. not returning any emails, not answering any calls, just not, and I'm calling, clients calling, you know, everybody, just nothing, total silence. So put your head in the sand, it might go, at the end of the day. It's getting to the point where you can appeal for non-determination. I've always sort of tried to sway away from that, because you're pretty much saying, well, I'm going to appeal this and I'm going to accept that it's going to be another 6 months. So you almost say to yourself, well, we'll just hang on for another week, another week, another week. And then before you know it, 6 months have passed and you're thinking, shit, I should have submitted that 6 months ago. But you don't know that. So yeah, that's a little application that we've just got approval for 3 units in
Grant, can I just stop you for a moment? There's a couple of questions in the chat panel I'd just like to break off and come to, if you don't mind. So Emma has asked, what are your thoughts on splitting a house into 2 and then making each a multi-unit? Or sorry, so multi-unit, yep, and then making each new house a small, it doesn't say, I suppose she means a small HMO.
Sure. So there is no PD routes to split a house. So no matter what, you're going to have to go full planning on that one, which is absolutely fine. And just be very aware that most councils seem to be quite oppositionary towards breaking up of larger family homes into flats. It seems to be becoming more and more, and we've had success with it, but you really need to understand what council you're looking at. So Manchester, they have policy against it. They will not approve a house being broken up into flats. Liverpool have just recently adopted a similar policy. Stockport, they don't have it in policy, but so because if you, let's say you had a mammoth house, let's say 500 square meter house, and you went, okay, I'm going to split that into 2 flats, and you go for full planning to split it into 2 flats, and they approve it, you still have the PD right in that scenario to run it as 2 HMOs, because you haven't used the PD to get to the separate flats. So in that scenario, as long as the planning department approve the conversion into 2 flats, then you're flat. You're absolutely flat. Should we actually have another look, see if any other questions?
Yeah, so Kashif has asked, what about a live-in landlord applying to create an HMO? So presumably if the live-in landlord owned their home, they were effectively turning, 3 or 4 bedrooms into rooms that they could let out.
Yep.
And of course they would be sort of effectively lodgers rather than tenants. Does that affect planning laws at all, or PD at all?
It's a very rare thing that this comes up to. I'm just trying to think that one through. I do know there was some people who would take one, because I think you're allowed to earn something like £7,000 a year before tax or something by having a live-in lodger.
Right.
You would still be in the scenario that if you had 2 tenants, okay, no, hang on, right. If it's your existing house and you want to bring in tenants, you can bring in 5 tenants, because you can still go up to 6. As long as you're not in Article 4, you can still go up to 6 unrelated people under PD in your house. If you had bought a commercial unit, turned it into a house, lived in the house, and still rented out, say, 2 other rooms in it, I believe you'd be in breach of planning law, because you've used the PD route and you would no longer be a C3 unrelated people living in it.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so Emma has come back and said, is there any guidance on planning to split houses? What's the likelihood to obtain planning?
Yeah, so this is where it gets really boring. What you'll need to do is go and look up type in the local council and see what some councils call it different things, but ultimately it's their planning policies, and look up specifically their planning policies for housing. So some will have it called a unitary development plan, a UDP. Some will have a SPG, spatial planning guidance, and they all call it different things, but ultimately, depending on what council we're looking at, just type in council planning guidelines or planning policy, and you're going to find a document which has got 500 pages in it. And then you're going to get overwhelmed. Usually the content in them, so it will direct you to the right stuff, but it is typical bureaucracy. They make it very word heavy. It's a lot of reading.
Yes, quite. Yes,
so
they do.
having an understanding of the local council is certainly helpful. Not the end of the world. At the end of the day, in the last 2 months, I've taken on projects in probably 6 new cities that I've never worked in before. People talk about getting your hot zone and knowing your area, and yes, that's great. But actually, at the end of the day, it's just having the mindset of, if you are breaking a new area, make sure you understand what the local policies are, what the local views are with regards to, if you do try to break up a house into 2 flats, how are they going to take it? Say some councils don't have a problem with it.
Yes, that's true.
But do you know what the best way to think of it is? If it's happened lots of times before, chances are the council are not going to let you do it that easily. So if you think about Manchester, which is a prime example, for 30 years, there has been absolutely loads of investors coming in and taking the houses and turning them into flats and HMOs and everything else. And then Manchester turned around in the 2010, somewhere around 2010, and went, we need to put a stop to this because we've got no families in Manchester. We've got nobody who votes, and we've got nobody who stays. And this is their idea behind it, their thinking behind it. It's a transient population and it's crime. And you know how they like to wrap all of their problems up, the students or the foreigners or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's rubbish. But that's the award-winning Daily Mail headline. So if you're going to an area that has lots of houses already split up into apartments, the chances are the council are going to be very precious about what remaining family homes they have or what they perceive as family homes. And I tried to argue a guy came to us with a big house that we had bought in Manchester. The house hadn't been lived in 20 years. It was in a terrible state, and it was on the high street. And it was absolutely huge. We applied to split it into three-bed flats. He had already applied to split it into 6 rooms, and it was refused under their housing policy. I think it's HOU 5. They will actively refuse the splitting up the house. And he had already bought it outright. He was stuck on this building. It wasn't worth renovating as a single dwelling. He came to us and said, is there anything you can do? And I said, look, no, it's the long and short of it. And he says, well, I need to do something. I need to try everything. And I said, the only argument I could think of running was, we'll run it as, we'll try and pitch it as 3-bed flats. We'll argue the case that they are family homes, because a 3-bed flat can quite feasibly be a family home. So surely that it should be considered that it's not the loss of a house. We also run in, I wrote a full design and access statement for it and wrote into it that the financial viability of the scheme did not stand as a single dwelling. Who's going to buy a 6-bed house with no garden, no off-street parking on the high street? It's just not viable. And Manchester still told us to get stuffed. Their policy was they would not accept the breaking up of the house. Even though the house hadn't been used in 30 years, wasn't financially viable as a house, nobody would live in it as a house, they still wouldn't accept it. So that's your very hard line. And that's it, just understanding what your local council's approach and thoughts on the matter is
another comment that Emma makes, which I think this is a very interesting one. I'd like to know your thoughts about this, Grant. I'm not sure. If you had 5 lodgers, would you require an HMO license?
Do you know, we're getting into the subtleties of the definition of lodger and tenant, I suppose. Arguably, if you had 4 lodgers and none of them are related to each other, you have 5 unrelated people living together as one household. So to my mind, yes, you should have a license. Because I don't recall ever seeing a differentiation between the actual status of the individual. All I ever hear, I'm just policies and what I've read, it's always been 5 people, 5 persons. It's never been 5 tenants or 5 lodgers. So,
I again think that would be one to refer back to the local council, wouldn't it? That they would confirm for you whether you did need a license or not.
Yeah, I have a feeling
that's another point, really.
Yeah, I have a feeling it's going to be one of those cases that would be argued in a high court. It would be argued in a high court if it had enough financial value for somebody to pursue it.
Yes,
what is the definition of lodger? Because like I remember somebody trying to say to me, oh, well, I've got 5 tenants all on one estate. I said, yeah, but it's still 5 tenants. It doesn't matter what the form of whether they're paying you cash or whether they're paying you on one AST or whether it's 5 ASTs. At the end of the day, it's still 5 tenants. It's still 5 individuals.
Yeah.
So,
anyway, sorry, that was a distraction. You carry on, Grant.
No, it's all right. We'll fire down the rest of these questions. Someone said, what about 5 lodgers? Thanks. I saw it come on the form the other day and they said yes, but I was unsure. My instinct, Emma, is that it probably will be, because trying to argue the semantic of what is a tenant, what is a lodger, the principle behind it is to ensure that people are living in comfortable surroundings. What I'm starting to think about, though, is in a house where, say, you had 5 priests living together or 5 religious people living together, HMO licensing doesn't necessarily apply in that scenario. And I'm wondering, is that the differentiation between a tenant and a lodger? I don't know. We're getting into real subtleties that I'm not sure of the answer. I'll actually look it up, because it is an interesting point. Where can I find more on the thermal upgrade requirements for sui generis, please? Lorraine, if you literally look up building regs and look up conservation of energy, it's, I can't remember the letter off the top of my head. I think it's hard. I always get these wrong. I think it's, I'm not going to guess it. One of the building regs documents, and it literally tells you what the thermal requirement is required for the conversion of a commercial unit, or a conversion of any unit, changing use of any unit to residential in the building regs, and they're readily, freely available online. So I'll crack back onto this. Any more questions? Well, we're coming quickly to the end anyway. So this is a scheme in Stockport. You can see it's an existing retail and office. So bottom right is the retail with 3 office floors above. I was telling you about the planning applications, the strategy, shall we say, to convert this. Strategy stage number 1, full planning. You see the change, flick between them, full planning. And there's 2 little tweaks. And you might be able to see it. It's a door on the upper rear 2nd floor, that was. And then there's a couple of windows in that toilet up in the top left. And I'll show it in elevation. So this is the existing, this is the proposed. Existing, proposed. So dropping the sill on a couple of windows, breaking a door through, and then over on the side elevation, punching 2 windows in. And the reason being that once we put that, and that's been approved, once we put that work in, we can then apply for the use change of the office space. Now, one of the qualifications is the 90 days empty, 3 months empty. So this building is actually used in part on the 1st floor and wholly on the 3rd floor, but currently the 2nd floor is entirely empty. So this is the prior approval that we've just submitted into Stockport to try and convert that floor into apartments. But the goal is to do this, and that's to build it all up. So in a way, this is where you start. This is the scheme. And then you start to deconstruct it backwards. And you go, well, okay, first thing, you can only apply for that floor because it's only got, it's the only empty one. And one of the things they're going to ask for is bin storage. So we start to go, well, that's obviously where we've got to put the bins in. It's got no site at all. The whole site is full with the building. So bin storage is the first thing we've got to put in. So actually, what we've got to apply for is actually just putting that door in, just there. See that door with the steps down? That's all we applied for in the first application, full planning, and 2 little windows just there. And that was approved. So little change, just like that. But in doing that, it makes the whole building developable. Developable. It's a hard word to say in my accent. Then the prior approval scheme is for this. These guys here have got quite a long tenancy, top floors with quite a long tenancy. They'll be there for a while. Most of this floor is empty. I think it's just this sort of area over here still in use. As these guys move out, the next prior approval application that goes in will be for that floor. But because we've already got the large bin store on the previous application, it'll be as existing. We can then use that for the whole floors. So that bin store was sized to accommodate every floor's apartments, which I think is 10, I think. So that's one strategy. full planning first, just for a door and a window, to then go in 10 apartments under PD, prior approval. And the reason for this is, again, if you go for full planning in this scenario, they could very well turn around and ask for car parking, for example. So new strategy we're seeing more and more. And this is we've probably picked up about half a dozen jobs of this recently, last 3-4 months. Clients are looking on the planning portal for reimproved schemes that have been done very badly. So this is one that a client picked up in Warrington. It was a submission for a commercial use into a 11-bed sharing 5 baths HMO. Anybody who does HMOs is going to look at it and go, well, do you know what? I don't like to run down anybody else's work, but it's pants. There's no nice way to say it. It's pants. It's just up the road from the hospital. It's in prime grade A rental area. Yeah, a nurse isn't going to sleep in a, 6.9 square meter room, or a young doctor's certainly not going to be jumping to get into a 6.4 square meter room. So this is, I don't know who did it. I don't care. Certainly not done well. So our client bought it, came to us and said, look, can you make this a bit more marketable? I'm prepared to lose a few rooms if needs be, but at the end of the day, I want something that I can rent. So what we did was we reconsidered the whole scheme, turned it into a 10-bed all-en-suite. So you've got 11 beds sharing 5 baths, 10-bed all-en-suite. Also something to note that for some odd reason, the previous design team had made a whole load of elevational changes, like where that door is. There's no need to move it. That's where the existing door is. You don't need to move the door, so I don't know why they did. We were able to jiggle it around to make the existing stairs work and everything else. In essence, keeping the build cost down. So there's that. Find an existing scheme which has been submitted, badly designed, and then get a proper look at it and see if you can make it better. Then, of course, you could also look and go, well, what has not been taken advantage of? We looked at this and went, well, it's coming with planning approval for 11 beds. So in principle, they've approved an 11-bed HMO. They're happy with it. On the previous scheme, there was no mention of the garage space. They just didn't include it. It certainly wasn't a prerequisite of the approval. So why don't we develop it too? So we've actually submitted this application, which is a 12-bed HMO, by developing out the garage as well. Far better value. You know, all 10.2 square meters plus, all en suite, nice large kitchen dining space. Yeah, far better value. I'm sure you can work out the numbers. You know, what's a 6.5 single bed in Warrington compared to a 13 square meter en suite bedroom? Far, far better. Another example, I'm going to, if you don't mind, the building owner of this approached me about 18 months ago. He's a restaurateur, wanted to, was a kitchen dining space for 12-bed HMO. Would that need to be 2 kitchens? I'll come back to it, Emma. So the restaurateur, COVID came, wasn't going very well, so decided he wanted to sell up and get out, asked us to price the job, didn't go with us, and went with somebody else, and they submitted a planning application for a 12-bed HMO. Our client, overseas investor, bought it with planning for 12. It's stacked as a 12-bed for him, but said to us, can you have a look at it and see what you can get out of it? We're about to go back into planning with 18 bedrooms out of it. Again, look at something that's been done badly, see if you can make it better. Just because you're buying it with planning doesn't mean to say that there isn't more planning gain to be had out of it. That's the best way to put it. Let's say other projects that we've done this strategy on, tired 4-bed HMOs in Article 4 to turn into 6-bed HMOs under PD. Done quite a few of them. So there's plenty of room, money in buying a crappy old student HMO, and you can still keep it as a student HMO, but get an extra couple of bedrooms out of it. We've done that quite a few times. Commercial done recently, which was again approved with 4 apartments. Our client, looking at the square meterage, knew there should be more apartments in it. Sent it over to us, and yeah, we've got 6 apartments out of it. Quite easy planning uplift or value uplift. Then we've got one over in Doncaster, existing 18-bed HMO. with a little bit of jiggery pokery, pushing and pulling, and a bit of an extension, we can turn it into 2 11 beds. So again, the 18 beds in pretty poor condition. It'll be in a lot better condition when we're doing it. We're going to do the work anyway. Might as well get the best value out of it. So that is that. Shall we look at the questions? Shall I turn myself back on?
Yes, please do. Please do, Grant. Thank you.
Start video. Okay. So,
amazing.
Questions.
Okay, right. So I'm just going back. So Philip Lacey says he would like the thermal upgrade info as well, please. Residential to sui generis. Yep. We could actually.
Sorry, it's not that it's residential to sui gen. It's any change of use. So it's in one of the building regs documents. I'll look it up later on, and it's pretty much they set guidelines for conversion of existing building to a new use. What the thermal requirement is off the walls, the roof, the floor, etc., and then you have to achieve that. So if your existing building already achieves it, you don't have to do anything. It's highly unlikely that your existing building achieves it. So you're going to have to thermally line it. And if you want a rule of thumb, generally a 70 mil insulated back plasterboard to all external walls is enough. So line the whole inside of the building with 2.5 inches of insulation and an inch of plasterboard.
Very good. Okay, that's useful. Thank you. Yeah, so basically the building regs aren't going to tell you how to achieve it. They just want, with acoustics and with thermal, they're just looking to give you the outcome, aren't you? The actual final outcome that it needs to achieve. So, but the methodology that you use is really entirely between you and your builder.
Correct. If you want to try and do it yourself, if you go to the likes of Celotex, most, or Kingspan, or any insulation company's website, they generally have what's called a U-value calculator. The U-value is the measurement of resistance. So in the building regs, they'll tell you that you need to achieve a U-value of, let's say, 0.18, that kind of like Kelvin per square meter, watts, whatever it is. So you need to hit 0.18. So you go, okay, well, how do I do that? You then go over to your insulation website, and you tell them what your current wall is, and then they will tell you the product to achieve your 0.18 reduction. And there's different ways to skin it.
Fantastic. No, that's really great. Thank you. Okay, so Emma says, a kitchen dining space for 12-bed HMO, would you need 2 kitchens? That's a great question.
I didn't say this, actually. I didn't say this, and I should have. Apologies. I did think about it earlier on. If you are going into a new area, any new area at all, and we do this every time, and not only if we're going into a new area, if we're going into an existing area, the first thing we do is download the local HMO standards. We never save them to our computer. We never use the existing ones that we have downloaded previously. We go and we download the current ones. And we've seen this happen a couple of times where they have changed between one project to the next project. So the kitchen dining space 12-bed HMO, would that need 2 kitchens? The answer to that is it depends where you are. The guidelines are not the same in every town or every city. So some councils will let you go up to 18 people sharing a kitchen. Now, you will theoretically have 3 kitchens in that kitchen, but they'll let you have. Other councils say that they will not approve any more than 10 people using the same kitchen space. So it just comes down to download the latest HMO guide. And the other thing to remember is that the HMO guidelines are written by local councils are that. There seems to be a bit of a mistake that a lot of councils say where they say they are standards. They're not standards, they're guidelines. The standards were set down by central government. Most councils have taken them and put their own layer of crap on top of it. That's a guideline. But at the end of the day, again, it's pick your fights. So, for example, the Wirral recently have put in a minimum guideline that they're insisting on for ensuite circulation space. It makes the ensuite bloody huge. I think it is crazy to say you want that much space in the ensuite. I can understand it if it's in a shared bathroom, because there's room for somebody to dry themselves in the bathroom before they go back to their bedroom. But at the end of the day, who goes into their ensuite, has a shower, and then stands in there and dries themselves? They will use their bedroom space to get dried and dressed and stuff. So I think it's a nonsense, but you can't fight it. You just have to accept it. So yeah, the Wirral now, every ensuite it's become actually really restrictive in how we approach the design on the world.
Interesting. Okay, so Jed has said, did you say earlier that Stockport Council can be very difficult for commercial to flats?
Stockport are just difficult, full stop. That is the end of that conversation.
Okay. Whatever you're trying to do. Yeah. Don't do it in Stockport.
No, they are absolutely terrible in responding. One of my jobs that fell apart this year was just because it was a year to the day. It was a little commercial. Sorry, excuse me. It was a church hall into 4 flats. The planning officer was happy with the scheme. He had signed off on it by about month 4. He had come back with some comments. There was comments from him and some comments from the housing department. Well, we had made the amends. He was happy, all honky-dory. And then he just decided to ignore the application for 8 months. And a year to the day, the client turned around and said, to hell with this, withdraw that application. I don't care anymore. After me chasing it every week for the previous 8 months. And the planning officer just ignoring us. One thing to bear in mind about Stockport, and I don't know if you'll have come across this or not, but I'm sure you have all heard of Section 106 or CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, or whatever way it's packaged up or named, Green Space Levy, et cetera, et cetera. Used to be that these were set down by central government, and the old rule of thumb was if you were doing any more than 10 houses, you would have to put a little bit in the pot, shall we say, to the local council, fund the Christmas party sort of thing. The governance from central government, that was done away with about 2 years ago, and it's now set by each council. Day one, Stockport decided to smack on a £2,000 per bedroom CIL, Section 106. So if you buy a 6-bed HMO in Stockport and you want to convert it to a 8-bed HMO, you will have to agree to pay £2,000 per bedroom for all 8 bedrooms because your use class has changed. So it's a little brown envelope. There you go. Can I have an extra 16 grand, please, from the council? And you've nothing you can do about it. And it's the same for flats. It's the same for any planning application that you stick in. We were actually caught on the hop with it. We had a planning application in for about 2 months. It was coming towards the end, and the planning officer turned around and said, we'll need to agree the £4,500 community infrastructure levy. And I had no idea where or why this had come from. And it literally had only come in the week before. And this was for 1 2-bed house, and they wanted an extra 4,400, 4,500, something like that, plus legal fees. So yeah, just bear that in mind in Stockport, that you're going to have to ultimately pay them some money.
Okay, right. Let's move on. A couple of other questions. If you put in planning for 7/8 beds and it was refused, could you still do your 6-bed under PD?
Assuming you've no Article 4, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But if you did get your planning for 7/8 bed, is it true then that you'd have to look at the thermal insulation?
Yes, that seems to be the thing at the minute. So the use class change seems that this is really difficult because the building regs are not written that clearly. But since Grenfell, there seems to be a lot more people going through it with a fine-tooth comb. And it is there. It was just never really asked for. So the approved inspector that you are using might not ask for it. But we're finding that most approved inspectors now seem to be asking for it.
And it's interesting what you said earlier about acoustics as well, because I'm finding with some of my clients that they're investing all over the UK, that some of them are now being asked for acoustics, when previously it was only the larger HMOs that were being asked for acoustics. But even 6 beds now, and it's not the planning officer, it's the HMO licensing officer, which is they're now actually talking to some of their colleagues who work in different departments. Good gracious me, what's happening here when people from the council start to talk to each other? But they are, and they're finding that their building control friends are saying, oh, hold on a minute, it needs to pass the acoustic test.
And see, that's not within their remit. you could argue that they say, well, look, show me where this is within the licensing remit. However, what they will say in response is that it is our duty to ensure a safe and comfortable environment. And that's a catch-all, because they can then say, we need to make sure the acoustics are right to be comfortable. So because
I am with my client, I am giving them arguments to go back and reject it, because otherwise the problem is that the development becomes so expensive, it's not worth doing it. Because of the additional acoustics and the thermals and etc. needed.
So we were even asked recently for airflow test for all extractor fans. I've never been asked for that on an HMO before. If I've been asked for it on an apartment scheme where you have an exceptionally long run between your own suite and your external wall, they asked for it on all. It just feels like building control are just really hammering HMOs at the moment, which unfortunately at the end of the day, that's just the game. All we ever do, as I say, is try to de-risk stuff.
Okay, right, brilliant. So so Emma says, is it still the case that commercial to resi permitted development doesn't suffer community infrastructure levy?
Correct. Yeah, only for planning applications.
Perfect. Sean says, if I'm running a 4-bed HMO, which was a 3-bed house, do I have to apply for change of use from C3 to C4?
No, you can hop back between C3 and C4. No, assuming you're not in an Article 4 area, you can hop back between C3 and C4 over and over and go both ways with it.
Sorry, carry on. I was going to say the only time you can't do that is when it's already been a commercial.
Yeah. Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Now this is interesting. Only if you've made use of the PD rules after the 1st of August last year.
Yes.
If it's an old commercial building that's been converted into a flat, then you can use the PD
Then you're
rules.
okay. Yeah. So it's date delineated, isn't it? Yeah. Okay,
and also just to throw into the mix, just to bear in mind there, I was trying, well, there's nothing I can do to help him, unfortunately it's screwed, but an investor in Liverpool bought us an HMO going into COVID. It was a C4 HMO going into COVID. He was down to 2 or 3 tenants. He removed them and he put a single family in. Article 4 came in. He didn't realize this and he lost his C4 status because it was a C3. Because he didn't realize, he thought it's been a C4, it'll always be a C4. But once you go below that 3rd tenant, you're theoretically back to being a C3. And he's trying everything to try and get it to be C4 on grandparent rights, but it doesn't have any chance, unfortunately.
No, you have to fight quite hard, I think. Again, I had another client who was buying or trying to buy a property that had been C4, but because it had dropped beneath 3 tenants, therefore they didn't have the sort of historical evidence to present to the council to give them automatic certificate of lawfulness.
Yep.
To be able to use it as a C4 going forward, and therefore the grandfather rights didn't apply, and the deal fell out of bed, which was such a shame. I felt so sad.
It's happened,
but it happens.
Yeah.
It does. Great. Okay. Well, listen, everybody, I would like to say thank you very much indeed for everybody's questions and contributions this evening. I hope you have found it useful. Grant, can you just share with us again your contact details so that if anybody has got questions or queries, or they want to contact you, or maybe they want to ask about your services, you would be able to you'd be able to help them. Actually, there is just one more question I've missed. Sorry, this was in the Q&A section. Can the local authority refuse to grant planning permission for an HMO in an Article 4 area?
Definitely. So just that's the point of Article 4. At the end of the day, it gives them the carte blanche to refuse. Now you can try and argue and you can try and appeal, but to be frank, it's very rare that an appeals inspector goes against an officer's decision. More common that they'll go against a committee's decision, but not a planning officer's decision, because a planning officer's decision is generally based on policy. So if it is Manchester, for example, they just say, no, we're not doing it. If it was, let's say, Salford, they may turn around and go, look, there's already quite a few HMOs in that street, so no, we don't think it's appropriate. They'll give you a little bit more meat on the bone. But at the end of the day, that's the reason that they brought in the Article 4, is for them to say no. And it would be highly unlikely that you'd be able to get that overturned at appeal.
Well, listen, we could go on for about another half an hour. There's, you know, this is such a complex area, but I think you've given us a really, really good overview, Grant. I'd like to say a massive thank you to you for coming this evening, sharing your knowledge and helping to clear up some of those knotty problems that maybe we carry around in our heads and we've got to try and sort out. So thank you ever so much for sharing that. Just to say to everybody, we will be sending out the recording. So if there's anything you've missed tonight or there's anything you want to rewatch, I will be uploading this to my YouTube channel, and then I'll send you the link to the YouTube channel so you can go and have a little watch of that. And there's some other videos and things that you can watch there as well. If you want to get a free copy of my latest book, you can do that. You just need to pay postage and packing, bit of a plug there. But for this evening, I would like to just say thank you all very, very much for being here. I hope you found it useful. I hope it helps you to navigate your way through HMOs and the new rules and what you need to be aware of, so that you can go out and make money, serve people and build a great business running HMOs for your local population. And thank you very, very much, everybody, for being here this evening. And we'll send out the links in the next couple of days once the video has rendered. Have a safe evening, everybody, and I'll speak to you all very soon. Thanks for tonight. Bye now. Bye.